Greetings to the viewers. Welcome to another installment of video podcast series brought to you by International Relations Program of European University. Today we have transitioned from our native Georgian to English, a change instituted to accommodate a truly esteemed presence in our studio. It is my privilege to present Dr. Rúchi Anand, a noted academic hailing from India and now residing in France. She is a renowned scholar in international relations and environmental politics. We are fortunate to have Dr. Anand with us today, ready to share her wealth of expertise and valuable insights. To offer some perspective on our guest's illustrious career, Dr. Rúchi Anand is a full professor, member of the academic committee and internship director at the American Graduate School in Paris, where she taught since 2002. She's also a faculty director at the International Business School in Lyon called CEFAM, Centre d'études franco-américaines du management. Additionally, she lectures at several other universities in France, as well as for Junior State of America program, at world-renowned campuses of Princeton, Georgetown, and Stanford University. Dr. Anand earned her PhD in the United States of America at Purdue University in 2002. She has authored many publications, among those 2 books entitled International Environmental Justice, A North-South Dimension, Ashgate 2004, and Self-Defense in International Relations, Palgrave Macmillan 2009. So we were privileged to welcome Dr. Anand to the university under the auspices of the Erasmus Plus International Staff Mobility Program, and she delivered insightful lectures for our students on the Russia-Ukraine conflict, on Georgia's integration to the European Union, and recognizing the importance of these topics, I invited Dr. Anand to discuss these perspectives with our broader audience today. Dr. Anand, I extend my sincere gratitude for your willingness to participate in the podcast series. This endeavor, a nascent initiative of the European University, commemorates its 5th episode with your notable participation. Prior episodes have featured esteemed Georgian academics teaching at the IR program of European University, and they have discussed vital topics such as China-Russia relations, the intricacies of Georgia's EU integration, the economic dimension of Russia-Ukraine war, as well as Georgian-NATO relations. And so we have already set a comprehensive stage for today's discussion. And for the interest of our viewers and Dr. Anand herself, let it be known that you bear the dual distinction of being our first international guest, as well as inaugural female scholar in this lecture series. So we eagerly await the unique insights that you will surely bring to this discussion. And now, without further preamble, let's embark on today's enlightening dialogue.
Madloba, Thátya, thank you so much for such a wonderful introduction. I'm absolutely flattered and honored to be amongst you and your fantastic students. So thank you to the European University for having me here and hosting me during this Erasmus Plus. I am just absolutely intrigued and delighted to see the beauty of your country. So I'm totally going to come back here again. So I can't thank you enough for having me here. And I'm ready to answer your questions.
Thank you. First of all, let's focus on the Georgian bid for EU membership. So there appears to be a discrepancy between the Georgian government's position on the fulfillment of 12 recommendations and the statements made by EU officials regarding their partial implementation. So this difference in perception could potentially impact the timeline and progress of Georgia's accession process, right? So what steps do you think should the government take to address any gaps and align their assessment with the EU's expectations for candidate status? Well, with all that in mind.
Gamar Joba, to all the viewers, I appreciate your listening. Thank you for that question. So that's a really complex and interesting question. In the perspective of other EU candidates who've made it, let's keep in mind that it's taken about 4 years for countries to get in. So I see Georgia's candidacy and all of these little, challenges as the beginning of a long journey ahead. The 12 principles that were presented to Georgia as their, report card, seems like the 2 that they did well on were gender equality and Georgia's response to the European Court of Human Rights and their recommendations. A lot of work needs to be done in the area of media, which ranked really low, electoral processes, oligarchy, the polarization in the country. And these are not easy charges against Georgia because it's going to take a lot of work. I think the whole world is watching the polarization, partly in the politics by itself, but also, I think, a bigger polarization between the people who seem to be towing a very different path than the government. So I think that ironing out process will have to take a lot of concrete measures and thought from the part of the government, because I think the people are ready. I want to say the people are more than ready. And if and when Georgia gets into the EU, it will be thanks to the people. Having said that, I think at the governmental level, some important decisions need to be made in terms of the tug of war that we're seeing as part of the new Cold War, with sort of Russia pulling from one side and the West, including NATO and the European allies. It's going to be a bit of a seesaw battle for a while, but I think as soon as the government, the state, starts making a more concrete decision as to, what are the long-term priorities? Where do we want to go? How do we address these issues that the European Union has sort of thrown at Georgia? It's a lot of work. It's an uphill battle. Having said that, the first step might really be a more synchronized effort from the people and the government together, so the world can see that it's one voice asking for one thing. It might be the first step.
Having mentioned this polarization, in your view, then, what are the potential risks and challenges that Georgia could encounter if the candidate status is not granted? So how might this decision impact the country's political landscape, both internally, regionally, even Europe-wide? Okay, locally, what could be the repercussions of a denial on Georgia's domestic politics, the public sentiments that you have mentioned, social stability? Regionally speaking, how might neighboring countries and regional dynamics overall be influenced by the outcome? And additionally, what could be the wider implications for Europe?
That's a really fascinating question. I could spend 3 hours trying to answer that because it's loaded. But you absolutely nailed the issues. So I don't even know where to start. But I think that the long-term repercussions of a denial will have to be seen from several levels of analysis. At the international level, I think a lot of it will depend on how the Russia-Ukraine war plays out and what might be a potential end or quagmire, I don't know. So I think that would play a huge role in terms of what the future repercussions might be on Georgia. In terms of Europe, as I was telling your students yesterday, the European Union is definitely an institution that stands by all the principles in Article 6 of democracy and human rights and economic freedoms and liberties, etc. Having said that, Europe itself will need to wait to see the future of the European Union. Brexit has raised some important issues about the future of the EU itself, you see. There are a lot of other countries with parties that are pretty right-wing and that have been bringing up the issue of, perhaps exiting. So I think one also has to wait to see how that plays out. Now, as far as the domestic level politics and the repercussions, for me, I think your 2024 elections will determine a lot of where this is going to go. People on the streets with all the energies and the efforts that they put in, and I think really the young people in Georgia, and my God, I salute you. You've really set the stage for what might happen when the dust settles down. But I think the two really important things that we need to wait and see is the end of some sort of visibility on where this war is going to go. So if, the Russia-Ukraine war ends with a Russian defeat, I think that carves out the way for Georgia to simply take a much bolder stab and go at it with the reforms that are required to enter into the EU. Having said that, a very tricky situation could be that this continues, and after a point, NATO fatigue, West fatigue starts giving Ukraine less of the support that they are. And in that case, I think that Georgia might be dealing with the consequences of having showed their cards a little early, of wanting to be in the European Union. Russia knows, in realpolitik, some of it is just sort of not showing your cards. And I think the world has now seen the overall political sentiments of Georgia. So that might be a much more difficult act, having to deal with a very belligerent and angry Russia dealing with Georgia once it's denied its candidacy. I personally don't think that the denial will take place. I think it will take long, but I see the steps are going in the right direction. So like I said, it's a very loaded question and a very interesting one, but I think mostly time will tell how this is going to play out in terms of the future politics that need to be addressed.
Your answer brings us to my next question, in fact, because indeed a significant portion of the population displays this pro-Western sentiments, as you have already mentioned, aspiring for closer integration with the European Union. But at the same time, Georgia highlights its vulnerability to its larger neighbor, Russia. So given this context, how do you think that European Union could effectively engage with Georgia to foster a stronger alignment of shared values that you've been talking about? So what are the strategies and approaches that could be employed to address these concerns and aspirations of Georgian population, while also taking account the country's geographic proximity to Russia as a concern, security concern?
So in answer to that question, I'm not sure exactly what those vulnerabilities will look like. But I think two of the recent measures or actions that have been taken by the government have been a bit worrisome. One would be the Foreign Agents Act, where CSOs, NGOs are being targeted, and so that really goes back to those 12 principles that start looking weaker. And the second, and probably more impactful, would be the opening up of the direct flight from Moscow to Tbilisi. And I think that's worrisome, not just for the Georgian people, but also for Europe. Because if Georgia enters the European Union and this flight addresses sort of people from Russia coming in, it makes Europe unsafe. So I totally understand that taking away from the integration, which is what Europe is about, to be completed. So I think the more ties that Georgia is able to cut from Russia, at least in terms of their politics, the stronger their candidacy will be to enter into the European Union. I think another comment I'd like to make is that it's not all worrisome. Europe is watching. And Georgia, here I'm talking about the people that, on the streets in their day-to-day lives, Europe is watching, and we see the European values at the level of the people. I've even seen the European Union flag everywhere in all the official, places, and I did
as well as Ukrainian flags, right?
Right, absolutely. So I really see, like when I'm, walking through the streets and visiting places, I feel a European culture. I feel the European values. And I was telling an ex-student of mine, who's in fact Georgian and came to France a year ago, I was saying, I feel like I'm in Europe. And he goes, yeah, isn't that right? So I really feel that the people and the country are ready. Europe is watching. I think it's just about fine-tuning the governmental level policies to be assuring Europe that in fact it is truly representing the demands and the concerns of its people. So I think that everything that the people are doing is working in their favor. It's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of patience, and it's going to be taking a lot of perseverance to continue with living with the values that signify Georgia, its people, and the European Union. Here I'm talking about, liberty, democracy, human rights, peace. These are the values that I see around me. So the network is set, the foundation is being laid. Now it's really about holding on to those truly in terms of their true values. So I'm really optimistic.
Exactly. I'm not sure if you have noticed as you entered the building, there is a star plaque after Zurabzhvania, the former prime minister of Georgia. I'm Georgian and therefore I'm European. It's written that these are the words that he pronounced in front of the Council of Europe as Georgia joined. So basically it became the motto and the slogan of our foreign policy ever since. And we in fact identify ourselves as Europeans. But you can understand that we have to navigate a very complex dynamics in the region, and then Russia has a carefully crafted foreign policy strategy, including the moves that you have mentioned, and these are all serving the Kremlin's geostrategic interests. So, and unfortunately, we're vulnerable to those moves. Moving to the NATO, because as we talk right now, the NATO Today Summit kicks off in Vilnius, right, Lithuania, and the focus is on Ukraine and its future potential membership in the alliance. I would like to hear your opinion about that as the summit unfolds, the question if the Ukraine's membership, security guarantees, whether it can receive or not. Looking back at the Bucharest summit in 2008, both Georgia and Ukraine received the plea that we would one day join NATO, the doors were open for us, so there is even a saying that we received better than maps, so better than membership action plans. So this is the quotation from the then president of Georgia. So given the context, I would like to hear your insights. So could you provide an overview of the discussions, if you are aware of them, surrounding Ukraine's possible future membership? And in your opinion, what are the main considerations and challenges on the way?
Okay, great. I'll address that question. I was just seeing the newspapers, and I believe the Georgian foreign minister is going to be attending this summit. For me, that's a great sign to start with. Having said that, Ukraine's entry into NATO and the European Union, the two brothers in arms, is partly, I think, an emotional response to the war crimes that we're seeing unfolding every single day. But it's paradoxical, because on the one hand, we are, when I say we, NATO primarily, is, and I'm probably going to be saying something controversial, but I think that NATO is also fueling and funding and perpetuating the war by focusing more on giving Ukraine the means to go fight Russia rather than getting the two on the table. I believe that, Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, all these countries that initially, talked about getting into the European Union and potentially NATO, was a huge provocation to Russia. But today, Russia is a lone, nostalgic superpower that shouldn't be made into bigger than it is. Like, I feel like the world is watching. They've got a lot of sanctions against them. Multinational corporations have actually cut ties with them. So I literally think that, the threat remains. Ukraine's probably entry into NATO and the European Union is a nostalgic move, but I'm not sure that it's as clean a card. I find getting Georgia in provides a much cleaner card than does Ukraine, because Ukraine is really in the heart of the war and a big puppet to be able to play the new Cold War. What we're seeing right now is a new Cold War that's outplaying itself, and unfortunately, Ukraine and countries like Georgia are sort of like the meat on the table that the big, ex superpower Russia and NATO allies are literally trying to play a tug of war on. So one doesn't have to make more of it than that, but I'm not sure I can predict what will happen. But Ukraine's move into NATO or European Union, in my opinion, is not without its own concerns and threats. I think within the European Union circles, there's a huge concern about letting Ukraine enter in to Europe, to NATO, because it's going to bring with it the same sorts of, worrisome challenges that we're talking about Georgia. So why Ukraine and not Georgia? So it's becoming more of a political move rather than something that actually has a checklist to go by. I'm not sure I'm really answering your question in the manner, but it's so broad that I think we can't talk about this without really seeing the new Cold War play up.
Yes, you in fact are answering my question, and there indeed are the potential risks, but also benefits, right, associated with providing this explicit clarity about Ukraine's membership. But to follow up on your answer, how do you foresee these debates about Ukraine's potential membership influencing the prospects and the timeline for Georgia's own aspirations for NATO membership?
Well, unfortunately, going back to the comment that I made earlier, the emotions are extremely high with the Russia-Ukraine war. Not to forget that we're living in a world where there are 10,000 other political issues that may be also of importance. The genocide in Yemen, climate change, wars happening all over the world, poverty, hunger, sustainable development. We're focusing on Russia and Ukraine for a reason. So Ukraine, like I said, emotions are high. If and when it does manage to get in, I'm not certain that it's related directly to the potential entry after that of now let's treat Georgia. The emotions will have to be as high. A window of opportunity will need to open. Otherwise, I think that Europe is going to play the wait and watch game before even sort of looking at Georgia's case more closely. They're going to want to see what happens with Russia, Ukraine. And so I think that they're going to buy more time. With the 12 principles already, they bought time. Like, you're not ready for it, go work, go do some homework and get your act cleaned up more. I see it as it's going to be a long, extended path. So I'm not certain that if Ukraine gets in, they'll say, all right, now let's look at, the Georgian files and see where you get in. On the other side, I think there's another debate that is very important to bring up here, which links to a comment I made earlier about Europe itself. Because there are discussions amongst and within European countries about how big can big become to still keep Europe as a strong, integrated, regional organization that will have the same kind of clout. Integration theorists tell us that, when you have too many people, too many countries integrated into one union, there's always going to be discrepancies that will disallow it from being a tight unit. We're already at 28 minus 1. And in the 28 minus 1, we know that there's a democratic deficit. Some countries have more power, more votes, more say than the others. And so I think a decision will also have to be made at some point as to at what point are we going to say, membership is complete, because at some point the strength of Europe and the solidity of its values will depend on how together Ukraine is and how homogeneous European values can be across the board. We know that in Europe, the 28 minus 1 now countries, some are really big, Germany, Italy, France, and then the small ones like Malta. There's a democratic deficit as we speak already in the European Union. So taking in more and more and more countries is a question that's being discussed. At what point is it too much, too many, to keep the European Union as tight as it was supposed to be? Or for that matter, NATO, what are the purposes of NATO? Is it still an alliance that's going to just keep trying to be an anti-Russian alliance? Or is it going to have a changed look so that it can incorporate more and more countries? Even NATO has a certain, soul searching to do. I believe that they asked India if India might at some point want to join NATO. And I was just like, wait, where is this going? So I think that this summit will be a series of discussions. I have a feeling that because the emotions are high and Ukraine is an important strategic player to allow the West and European countries to sort of show that they stand for their values, Ukraine might actually get the checklist and get in. But I'm not convinced that Ukraine's membership will automatically and subsequently open the doors for the next candidate being Georgia, because Georgia has, like I said, a lot of work to be doing after the report of the 12 principles were given. And I think that Europe is quite serious about sticking by making sure that Georgia has, gone blue on all of those.
So you basically see this process of Euro-Atlantic integration as one, rather than separate like European Union track and a NATO track. For Georgia, I mean.
I guess I see them as brothers in arms. They're related at the same time as not. The European track definitely will open doors for Georgia to down the road also get into the NATO track. From what I understand, the people are more wanting accession into the European Union. And I think there are fewer people who, when polled, want the NATO memberships. I think we're about like 88 plus for European Union and like about 70 something for NATO. I see it as subsequent steps. So it's going to be European Union first and then NATO, perhaps. They are interrelated. I don't know how they would interact with one another, but I think there's a lot of testing waters before the real discussions are held. I feel like right now it's really a flaky, not necessarily a serious look at Georgia, just because there's too many red flags.
The prioritization of European integration is a more recent development, in fact, and this is also connected to the disappointment with the 2008 Bucharest summit results, because before, the main priority of Georgian foreign policy was integration into a NATO because of the security concerns. And then we somehow switched to the European integration. So before, it was all Euro-Atlantic integration as one. And then for us, these two tracks went separately. So that is why I asked you to contemplate on it, how you understood this processes,
You're absolutely right. So I think that in fact maybe plays against Georgian candidacy. The little flip-flop between NATO, European Union. I think there's a lack of clarity as to what Georgia wants to enter European Union for. The initial demands for wanting to be part of the NATO alliance, or having that kind of security umbrella for as and when Russia was to get aggressive against Georgia, which has happened in the past, it was more of a security alliance. Then, like you said, there was a flip-flopping between NATO to, oh wait, European Union, how about that? And Georgia showed their cards quite early. It was more about a security umbrella that it was looking for, not necessarily accession into EU. But I think the realization that NATO and European Union are brothers in arms. They're in fact quite related.
And they both provide a security umbrella of their own.
Being part of the European Union automatically means, going out there and helping out if there was trouble. And that's where NATO comes in. NATO has similar articles that says, any attack against a member country will be a common, So I think that flip-flopping between prioritizing NATO versus EU also kind of opens doors as to what exactly does Georgia want to get into the EU for. Is it for security for themselves, or is it because there's truly a blending of the values that Europe would desire? And I think over here it also raises serious questions, and this kind of is going to a slightly different direction as to what does Georgia really see the impact of joining the EU on itself. I was raising this with students yesterday, and I was saying, there's pros to joining the European Union and potentially NATO, but there's also cons. It's about giving up a certain amount of sovereignty. It's about being able to rub shoulders with the bigger powers that are going to enter Georgia with a smaller voice and smaller votes. It's about perhaps compromising a little bit on certain things that I believe are inherently a part of Georgian culture. Being part of a big group like that definitely will come with some cons as well. So to kind of go back to a point earlier, Georgia's voice needs to be quite uniform, solid, and focused on what exactly they want for themselves. And I'm not certain that comes across as clearly.
Well, thank you for being honest and straightforward. This is appreciated. To sum up, today we actually delved into crucial subjects such as Georgia's bid for EU membership, the potential risks and challenges Georgia may face if the candidate status is not granted, effective EU-Georgia engagement, navigating Georgia's delicate balance between the relations with Russia and the European Union, the ongoing discussions about Ukraine's potential NATO membership and its influence on Georgia. And I think your expertise and perspectives have shed the light on these complex issues, leaving us with valuable insights to contemplate on, and your contributions have definitely enriched our podcast, and we are grateful for your participation. Thank you so much for that.
Madluba Thatiya, and also to the audience for listening to my viewpoints on an issue that I know is the heart of Georgian politics at the moment. I do apologize in advance for having stabbed on any of the issues that might be extremely sensitive, but as a scholar, that's what I saw, and it's been a pleasure to share that with you. Thank you again for this invitation to do the podcast.
Much appreciated. That was much appreciated. And as we conclude this episode, I encourage our viewers to stay informed, remain engaged, continue exploring the intricate dynamics of international relations, and understanding these subjects is vital in shaping a brighter future for Georgia, for our country, as well as Ukraine, Europe, and I believe the world. So thank you, dear Rúči, for sharing your knowledge, and thank you, viewers, for being part of this enlightening conversation. Until next time, goodbye and take care.